Is Danganronpa V3 good? I guess even most critics of the game's ending don't say the whole game is bad, which is surprising. You know, usually people on the internet take things to extremes with anything that they dislike, but I feel that, as far as I've seen, plenty of people that strongly dislike V3's ending, maybe other aspects of the game as well, and it isn't their favorite in the series, but I don't really see a ton of like, oh, this game completely sucks, what a pile of trash, arguments, but maybe that's just from the circles I travel in. This video here will serve multiple purposes. I'm going to be discussing the ending twist and everything in the game that reflects the ending's mentality, the themes it's going for. In part, this is about making an argument in defense of the ending for people who underestimate it. In part, this is about analysis of the game's characters, story, themes, and furthermore the whole Danganronpa series' themes. And in part, I'll be looking at it from a broader philosophical angle at whether or not I think this approach the game takes to meta is healthy, I guess, is the right word? Healthy. Is it in good taste? Is it admirable? Is it respectable writing? First things first. The ending of V3 tells us that in this universe, Danganronpa was a long-running franchise, mostly TV shows, I guess. I'm not going to get bogged down in the specifics of details that may or may not be faked or what is truthful about the ending. That's not the point of this video. The point is, the ending is clearly making a statement about serialization. The killings never stopped because there was always demand for the series to continue. Not only that, the fanbase just eats up the exact same shit over and over and over again. 53 reveals of Junko as the mastermind. 53 hopes winning against despair. The audience, in large part, continue to soak it all up. The company continues to make these TV shows that just repeat the same ideas over and over, and the audience is also at fault for their willingness to be comfortable with an uninspired, copy-and-paste franchise never ending. Now, I want to get something out of the way. Even if the story didn't take this direction in the final act, the game would still be about these exact same topics already. A story's meta doesn't have to be confined to the literal plot events, hence the name, meta. Danganronpa has a rich history of meta, and to sum up the overall meta developments of each mainline game, it would be something as follows. Danganronpa 1 is meta in a relatively straightforward sense. It's a deconstruction and reconstruction. It's a parody. It takes well-known manga tropes and makes them extreme. It pokes fun at them, it twists on them, and it revitalizes them. It is deliberately tropey in every way, every sense. Every piece of the game leans into some kind of trope. And the game works with those genre expectations to play with those tropes in interesting ways. In one sense, twisting classic tropes works well for mystery stories because it offers twists on expectation. But that's not the only goal. Even if you see something coming, you can still appreciate the cleverness of how a trope is subverted in a way that you haven't seen before. If you're familiar with the tropes and recognize them, of course. Danganronpa 2 is meta in that it plays off of itself. It doesn't just use existing genre tropes, it creates Danganronpa tropes. It establishes the authority of the original game, and it creates a universe that operates by the expectations from the first game's tropes. Suddenly, DR2 is a study into the world that would have to exist to facilitate these tropes. Like, if we live in a world where students of exceptional talent are scouted for the special privileged school, we create a world obsessed with rampant social Darwinism, classism, etc. Everything in DR2 establishes about the world is based around the meta question, what would a world be like if all of the tropey bullshit in the first game was taken as a fact, as a given? It isn't just twisting specific tropes directly anymore, it is creating an entire mythos of how a meta world functions out of this reconstruction. So then we come to V3, which has by far and away the most controversial approach to meta, and not just because of the ending and the literal plot events. The writing approach to V3 is quite literally, what if we made a world based around the tropes becoming shitty? That is the story. Danganronpa is on number 53 by this point. They don't innovate anymore. They recycle the same formula, the same tropes, the same ideas over and over again because it sells well, because the audience is afraid of change, because they're easily amused by the comfort of familiarity. The story is based around the bad writing habits that naturally come from a series becoming lazy and repetitive, from relying too much on a successful formula, on successful tropes. Now, even at a glance, this does make perfect sense for the next and final game in the series. Think about it. The first game is all about, let's take tired, bad, shitty tropes, tropes that that people consider trashy and repetitive, at least in Japan, that everyone normally makes fun of in anime, and let's twist them and make them kind of exciting and interesting again. The second game evolves that into an entire mythos. It creates a self-sustaining world out of that reconstruction. It establishes the formula of Danganronpa, separate from all other media, the tropes of Danganronpa. V3 is the natural conclusion of that meta. V3 completes the circle. It tells a story of how tropes, once popularized like they become in DR2, can be overused and relied on and exhaust all of their value. It tells the story of how a trope becomes a shitty cliche. Full circle. The first game, 1, 2, and then V3, start by taking bad tropes, making something fresh, create successful tropes with your new ideas, and then eventually use them so much that they become the bad tropes. And then the next writer will have to take your lazy, overused tropes and reconstruct them to make something fresh. It shows the corruption of artistic vision. How Danganronpa was originally made to be a bastion of creativity, making things that are new, and through the clutches of success, popularity, the stranglehold the audience has on constant reconsumption, the appeal of comfortable formula, it was bullied into becoming serialized to the point of just being the thing that it was originally made to criticize, just being repetitive tropes. Like I said, V3 would have this meta even without the ending taking the direction it did, so let's talk about that. V3 adheres to countless established Danganronpa tropes, so let's talk about some of the ones that most people are already aware of. We've got the betrayal of a close friend in Chapter 1, the reveal of a serial killer in Chapter 2, double murder in Chapter 3, as well as a motive no one can sympathize with, big character dies in Chapter 4, etc. Tons of Danganronpa commonalities. V3's criticism of these established tropes usually follows this pattern. We expect the trope early on, but the tropes in how it's being executed upon seems too obvious, so we doubt it because it feels flimsy. The game toys with the idea of not following the formula, and then it reveals that no matter what, it will adhere to the formula. It will stick to the tropes. It cannot subvert the tropes. Just using these examples, Chapter 1, Kaede and Saihara reflect Sayaka and Makoto, or Komaida's turnabout reveal in Chapter 1 of DR2. Their motives differ, but in practice, many people are led to expect treachery from Saihara in Chapter 1 when they're playing through it, because of this established trope of betrayal.
What's the matter? You seem so sure of yourself during the investigation. Is it because you did it?
But when you think about it while you're playing it, it seems too obvious. It would be insanely obvious if Saihara were the killer. We suspect him in the trial, but we suspect him too early. And then we know that since it's early on in the trial, well, he probably isn't the killer, right? We clear his name and we assume that the game is not going to rely on the betrayal trope. It's not going to do it. But then the twist is, it is sticking to the tropes, no matter what. But the betrayal is that it's Kaede and not Saihara. Chapter 2. The trial is already over, literally done with the trial. They've exited the trial grounds. It seems like they aren't going to do the serial killer reveal trope that they've done in the previous two. But after you already assume they're leaving that trope behind, Maki is revealed at the last possible moment. Chapter 3, it feels too obvious. Double murder? Again? Way too obvious. You enter the investigation and you kind of think that you're in the clear. Maybe they won't rely on the trope, but then they do. They even add an extra way of toying with that expectation of how strictly they'll adhere to this trope with how they do Oma's fake-out death. As another way of toying with the expectations of this trope, they introduce the possibility that multiple killers could be on the loose, like that only the person who is guilty of killing Angie is at fault. So there's a possibility that the real culprit only killed one individual, which opens up more possibilities. But if they were to do that, that would go against the trope of having the culprit having killed two people. So even though it's presented as a possibility, it's in the game is incapable of following through on it because it has to adhere to the formula. Chapter 4 is where the criticism really gets clear. As soon as you know that Miyu is the victim and not Gonta, you can assume Gonta is the culprit purely off of those tropes. Because the large character always dies in Chapter 4. But that's too obvious, right? No way that they'd reveal the killer this early on. You doubt it. You doubt yourself, you doubt the trope, you doubt the game's commitment to this trope because it feels flawed. Because it feels like it breaks the mystery. This is the meta-commentary that's being played. You, the player, you are the one that creates the mystery and the doubt in these situations. You're the ones you are the one making things more complicated because you doubt the tropes are as flawed as they are. But they are flawed. You know, this works in two completely different directions. On one hand, it's a criticism of serialization and trope reuse, as the writing becomes lazy and shitty with its adherence to the successful formula, becomes predictable and bland. You know, they rely on tropes too much that it just makes the answers obvious. This works because our initial expectations based on understanding these tropes is always accurate. The trope will be followed, even if it seems to destroy the mystery, like with Chapter 4. It shows the flaws of formulaic writing. But on the other hand, it does serve as an engaging mystery with ourselves, because we have to question whether or not they will follow the trope. We have to question if the answer is as obvious as the tropes seem to make it appear. Think of it in-universe, right? We can find V3's mysteries engaging because we have faith in the storytelling, because we naturally doubt things that feel too obvious, that feel flawed or shallow. But for people in this universe who are on number 53, the audience who have seen this exact same trope play out for 53 fucking seasons, 53 killing games of the big character always dying in Chapter 4, always committing to these same tropes, imagine how shitty and flawed and obvious the writing would feel then, with zero doubt in your minds that the formula will be followed. It simultaneously makes an interesting play off of our expectations, while also clearly proving how tropes can become bad. V3 was the game this team worked on the longest. DR1 and DR2 went through a ton of rewrites and changing ideas. DR1 changed its entire game structure through development. V3 was the one that was the most planned out ahead of time, the most compact, and the most purposeful in its choices. If you think the meta in DR1 or DR2 is clever, imagine how apeshit they went for a game that they crafted over a much longer development cycle. Like it or not, you can't deny the intentionality of the structure. This is a game series that takes its own marketing into consideration with its storytelling and playing off of your expectations. To properly experience V3, you were supposed to watch all of the trailers and have already baked into your head that Kaede is the protagonist long before the game launched. I mean, in trailers for the game, certain gameplay mechanics, like the new mechanic they added in V3, where you're listening to multiple different characters at once, the multi-chaos debate, whatever the fuck it was called, that was introduced in the trailers as like something to do with Kaede specifically because of her musical audio ear, like her talent. Like there was so much that just reinforces through multiple different forms that she would be your protagonist long before the game even launched. It is that intentional with its crafting that all of that is taken into account. If I had to levy a criticism against this approach, I'd say that I think V3 requires you to be almost as familiar with DR's tropes as its own creators. This is especially not going to fly out here in the West, here in America, where people don't even know about all of these Japanese tropes that they've been making fun of since the first game. tons of people in the West still, to this day, see DR as inventive, not because of how it plays with existing tropes. They see it as inventive because they don't recognize the tropes that it's building its plot around, so they think that all of its ideas are completely original. So, for V3's intensely crafted experience of expectation and trope literacy to work, the audience needs to be on that shit. They need to really see the parallels and elements at play and make judgment calls out of expectations of those parallels in real time. I think they might be expecting a bit too much from their audience for the intended experience to play out as was tightly crafted. See, it's one thing if you have like a really dense story that requires a lot of literary knowledge and work to unpack and analyze. But anyone can do it if they study it hard enough and do the work. But for V3 to land as intended, the audience has to be knowledgeable of these tropes before they play the game the first time, because it impacts how they experience it and their expectations without knowing the plot ahead of time. It's not something that you can fully appreciate by playing it and then learning after the fact about what it's doing. The surprise and the mystery elements of the experience is predicated on the audience's pre-existing analytical perspective on the series and their expectations based around their recognition of Danganronpa tropes. That's asking a lot from the audience. Anyways, back to more of V3's criticisms of serialization and lazy writing. It isn't just about DR tropes. This game is a general criticism of all sorts of writing flaws that pop up in this type of environment, right? If a writer is the kind of person who bases 90% of their storytelling off of lazily copying existing tropes and popular trends, then what sort of flaws come with this approach? There are examples closer to Chapter 6 and closer to the literal plot, like Tsumugi has to suddenly cram in some forced, out of fucking nowhere tie-in to Hope's Peak Academy and DR 1 and 2 in Chapter 5, just for the shallow fan service to keep the audience engagement, to keep the audience entertained, and change the story's direction since she was running into a roadblock because the killing game was becoming boring since no one was doing anything. Kaito's illness is also hinted to be this kind of lazy writing. Like, the characters talk about how it doesn't make sense to the plot. According to the plot, there is no reason that Kaito should be sick. It does not make sense. But it was forced into the story in a contrived way by Tsumugi. The story they were learning about from all the flashback lights and all the other evidence also sounds like one of the stupidest, most trite hack writing backstory plots imaginable. Like, okay, think about it. So, the world was ended by, like, 3 different twist forces. Like, okay, so we're shoving meteors into the plot now. Fair enough, I guess. Oh, wait. It's not just, like, meteors destroying the planet. It's also, like, a world-spanning disease? It's a disease now? That the meteors brought? Why? Why couldn't it just be, oh, there's meteors, that's bad. Now there's also a disease. Oh, now there's also a death cult. Literally, they shove in 3 completely different apocalypse excuses, apocalypse tropes, just to shove in more and more tropes and trendy twists in the story. Any other story could have just picked one of these. World ended from meteors. World ended from disease. World ended from horrible death cult, etc. These are all apocalypse tropes, but despite how contrived each of these excuses are, Tsumugi's story just shoves all of them in and tries to tie them together. It is very bad writing. V3 is also filled with nostalgia bait for the other entries in the series that popularized the franchise, like the fucking Virtual World, Neo World program, Secret Door in the Bathroom, etc. There's countless references to the original games just shoved in for completely meaningless fan service by Tsumugi. These are all traits of the style of hack writing that is usually associated with formulaic, lazy, trope-based storytelling, or like continuing a series but like that's too popular, so you're afraid of changing anything or doing anything that the fans aren't going to like. So they shove in things without thinking about the logic of the story, make tons of callbacks, tons of fan service appeals, etc. And I'm not even going to talk about how much Monokuma and the Mono Cubs directly talk about this mentality and the lack of artistry that's involved with serialized writing and looking at it as just a business. One area very early on where this is apparent is in the talents of our cast. After all, Danganronpa, by its definition, by its formula, it has to have a character of 16 characters with ultimate talents. In DR1, this was a parody of manga and anime in which, like, games where the cast of high school students are bizarrely talented to superhuman levels and random things. Like, you watch any fucking anime, right? You watch, like, fucking Haikyuu, right? High schoolers play volleyball so well that they can defy the laws of physics. Tons of manga make their characters inhumanly talented at whatever the story is about. DR1 just takes that concept and parodies it. It makes it more extreme, with characters inhumanly talented in a bunch of really random shit. Some talents are so random that they feel completely useless and incomparable to the rest of them. Some talents make no sense to be trained in a school environment, like the bike gang leader. Why would a bike gang leader go to school to learn how to be a better rebel against society? It has a bunch of meta jokes that play off of this concept. In DR2, the talents are more of a part of the mythos. They aren't just talented students anymore. We've established that this universe has a clear separation between people with inhuman talent and normal people. The talents are curses that plague the character's ability to be normal. This is most chiefly obvious with Komaeda, whose talent controls his entire life, personhood, personality. In games that are so entrenched in meta, you have to wonder what makes the protagonist of each game so special to the meta commentary that they are in fact the protagonist. For Makoto, he was simply a well-established trope of a protagonist. He was a general, normal, happy-go-lucky protagonist trope, with a particularly clever reconstruction. Hajime is important because he has no talent in a meta-commentary that is increasingly becoming about how this universe is built around separating the characters born with worth, that deserve to be part of a story, and everyone else, the side characters like Hajime, who just fill out the world. But let's talk about V3 and its approach to talents. The thing I always found one of the strangest about V3 is its choice of protagonist in Saihara. I just didn't see how he was an evolution of the previous concepts. I like him just fine, but he kind of just felt like more of the same. A weak character who grows stronger over the narrative. He didn't feel like an evolution of the previous protagonist to me. But once I recognized the patterns in the talents of V3, it clicked. Just like Hajime is the protagonist of DR2 because he is the talentless bystander, the odd one out, the representation of this talent-driven universe, Saihara is the perfect reflection of V3's commentary on DR talents, as a DR trope. If V3 is all about the kinds of bad writing that you'd expect from a heavily serialized, formulaic game series, then how would it handle its talents? The joke is that the talents are not justified by the writing, by the storytelling. Yes, in typical, lazy, bad writing fashion, 53 simply follows the formula of Danganronpa, but without the quality or attention to detail of the original games. 53 just slaps on talents willy-nilly, without writing a compelling story around those talents that makes them feel realistic or earned or believable. That's the joke. Saihara is a real person who was given fake memories in this universe. That's diegetically what's happening. He's a real person who was given fake memories, and those fake memories are themselves badly written. He feels imposter syndrome about his talent, about his ultimate talent, because the writers of 53, Tsumugi, simply just dumped an ultimate talent in his lap without fully developing a believable backstory and world for him so that it would come across as real. And as a result, based on his memories, based on his understanding of his backstory for his character, he doesn't see enough storytelling to justify him being called an ultimate either. There are plenty of stories where a character, just does one simple thing, like Saihara solving a single case, one case, and that's all he ever did, and this is supposed to establish that character as, exceptionally talented or an expert in something. This is the criticism. Saihara doesn't feel like his backstory warrants his title. Why would they select him? Why would they? There's no evidence in his life that suggests he's an ultimate level talent, so he doesn't believe it. as the audience of a story would struggle to believe a shitty backstory in a different narrative. It's actually a really clever way of presenting this kind of criticism. Like, imagine it, right? Like, in this universe, the only thing written for his backstory is that he kinda helped out with some cases with his uncle, and he solved one single murder case. That's all Tsumugi wrote for his backstory. Yet she still wrote him to have an ultimate level talent, and he was selected by the government to have this ultimate level talent. In the real world, there is no fucking way someone with that backstory would be expected by anyone else to truly be an ultimate. They barely have any experience. There's no reason to believe they have enduring talent. The joke is that the writers who created Saihara, they know that Saihara is an ultimate because they wrote him to have an ultimate level talent. But he doesn't know that he's an ultimate because there's no in-universe justification for it in his backstory, in his memories that were written. They wrote him to have a real talent, but didn't justify it in his memories. This is the kind of shitty, bad, lazy, contrived writing that you can expect from serialization like this. His entire inferiority complex and his imposter syndrome, the crux of his character, it is all a dig against lazy serialized writing and just slapping together a universe and characters without justifying them, with adequate build-up, with believable build-up. Saihara is not the only one. The entire cast, almost the entire cast, can be viewed this way. Tsumugi just slapped them with some ultimate titles, ultimate talents, but did nothing to justify it in the storytelling. So the characterization is that they have to find ways to justify their talents themselves. A ton of the characters have a very similar feeling of self-doubt around their talents for the same reason. Kaito, Kibo, Himiko, and Saihara, all four of them are insecure about their ultimate talents because they don't have backstories that make them feel like they earned it. Let's go down the list. Kaede is the only character in the game with a justified talent, which she said is right at the start. She explains that she played a shitload of piano her entire life from childhood, got more and more talented at it, got into competition, was passionate about it, dedicated herself to her hobby until she was the best at it. Straightforward, simple, and it justifies her talent. That is the most basic way of making her ultimate level talent believable. She worked hard until she was the best at something that she loved her entire life. That makes sense. But it is very basic and very obvious. Rantaro is a made-up ultimate. He probably wasn't the ultimate survivor in the previous killing game he made it through. Like Saihara said, a new person gets picked to be the ultimate survivor each game. His ultimate status is just kind of goofy to begin with. Based on his room, they say he is an expert at death games. They say that he is talented at them, but nothing in his past warrants this. He's just a dude who loved to travel, and he has a lot of sisters. He was given talent for death games. He was given confidence, suspicion, all of these gifts, with zero justification for how he as a person obtained these abilities. Ryoma is disillusioned by his ultimate tennis player status and has no intention of playing the sport ever again, in addition to the obvious incongruity of his height in relation to a sport that is very dependent on one's height. Kirumi's ultimate is so poorly defined by Tsumugi's writing that she's basically just ultimate everything. Since her ultimate talent is just described as being really good at serving people, she's allowed to be the best at literally anything. Which is yet another case of lazy, sloppy writing that created a weird ultimate talent. Kaito is an ultimate, or rather a super high school level, for a talent that literally cannot be performed by a high schooler, so he's only a trainee and feels insecurity because of this. Miyu is not only just a very insecure person like many of the others, she also has no justification for her talent at all. She literally just was like a person, whatever, and she went into a coma, and when she came out of her coma, she had an ultimate level talent for inventing things, not as a result of effort or knowledge or anything, just magically, without her influence or understanding, good ideas for inventions would just appear in her brain after she woke up from this coma. This is a perfect example of bad writing forcing its way into the minds of these people and creating this weird complex about their lives and their traits and abilities, because the storytelling is not convincing. Oma's talent makes no fucking sense, and it is never explained what Oma's talent is supposed to even be, what it technically means as the ultimate supreme leader. Maki's talent as the ultimate assassin is like an extreme version of some of the goofier ones in the prior games like Mondo or Fuyuhiko, ultimate talents that are very bizarre to be sanctioned by a school or the government. Maki is literally a hitman who kills money, who is against the law for the sake of a literal cult, and the government sponsored her. They're just like, hey, you're really good at killing people, bro. Have some grant money. Yeah, fuck yeah, girl. Gonta's backstory does justify his talent, but it's the opposite extreme. It's the opposite criticism. Instead, for Gonta, it feels like Tsumugi, instead of not writing enough to make the talent believable, they went too far to try to justify it, and they made his backstory insane, even by DR standards. He was raised by fucking wolves after he got lost in the forest as a child and learned how to speak bug and shit like that. This is a ludicrous fucking backstory to make up just to justify why he's an entomologist. They jumped the shark with him and pushed his justification way beyond believability. Angie and Tenko have particularly interesting ones to me. Angie is the ultimate artist. But similar to Miyu, she seems to suggest that her talent comes from a source other than herself. Like she didn't work to earn this skill. Just like Sahara and all those other people, she can see no rational explanation for why she is an ultimate, why she has this incredible talent. So she justifies it to herself by considering it the act of a higher power. Think about it. For all the backstory Angie gives about her island and how she's considered a prophet or whatever by her people as a diviner, in all of her FTEs and throughout the entire game, she never seems to bring up or talk about her ultimate talent at all in connection to her religion. I think, if we're supposed to read into this subtextually, it makes the most sense to assume that Angie's talent and her religion are extremely closely connected. I think that Angie, because Angie was written to have this ultimate level talent, but just like for the other characters, she had no idea why she's talented at art. Her incredible talent is probably what led her to gain power that she holds in her island. Like, we're never given any other explanation. She's not the daughter of anyone important. We're never told why her people consider her to be the prophet, to hear the words of God, why they respect her so much. So I think it's pretty clear that it was her talent that gave her this authority, that convinced her people that she really was connected with God. She sought a truth in a higher power for something unexplainable happening to her due to Tsumugi's sloppy, unnatural writing with handling her talent. Tenko is my personal favorite. Love her to bits. In terms of this video, the concept still holds. It's very similar to Oma. Like, how is Tenko supposed to have earned the title of Ultimate Aikido Master? She literally doesn't practice real Aikido. She does a bunch of made-up shit. She's not even a very strong fighter. She easily loses to Gonta. She admits multiple times that she's very sensitive to pain. She's afraid of getting hurt or beat up. She's not a powerful martial artist. Of course, as a deconstruction, there is actually plenty of precedent for calling her the Ultimate Aikido Master, just like Sahara is the ultimate detective, even if he doesn't know it. Because his backstory is so that they put into his mind is so hacky. Such is the case for all the cast. They are the ultimates that they're written to be. They are written to have these talents, but simply because they were written to be ultimates, not because of anything that they recall in their lives that would convince them, or convince a government program or anyone else to give them a title of ultimate. Kaede is the only one that they bothered to give a convincing justification to, a reasonable justification, to describe a character that could reasonably be recognized as an ultimate without bafflingly contrived, unrealistic backstories. This is why Saihara is the protagonist of V3, as the character with the most defined relationship, like clearly lacking backstory to justify his title, the most internal conflict with rationalizing his title that he doesn't feel he earned. Such is the meta-commentary present in V3 and how it handles the iconic formula of talents and what they represent in each iteration of this meta-exploration that the Danganronpa series does. So yeah, all of that's all meta-commentary that would still exist even if the plot didn't go in the direction it does in Chapter 6. Now, I'm not saying that the story could have been changed, like the story could have removed that main twist. Not at all. The story they were telling with the stupid fucking meteor disease thing was moronic and boring and would have made for a horrible actual story. My point is, The parody and criticisms of serialized writing exist without having a literal example of it in the plot. So, I hope I've established some of the cleverness and intentionality of this meta approach that V3 has. But that brings us to our major philosophical topic. Is this good writing? I mean, at the end of the day, V3 is basically written poorly on purpose, right? Its plot has tons of elements that are clearly flawed on purpose to criticize this style of storytelling. Sure, all parodies are criticisms. They have criticisms, but parodies often get criticism levied against them that they're just doing exactly what they're making fun of. Sometimes when you're making a criticism of something, you're riding the line between just doing the same bad shit. But V3 seems to ride the line a little bit more than DR1 or 2 did. Even if it's intentional, even if it's meant to be a criticism, does that excuse some of the writing choices that V3 has? Like, for instance, how easy it is to predict Gonta as the culprit in Chapter 4 just through recognizing the tropes. Does it justify its approach and turn into something constructive and interesting, or is it just the bad thing that it is trying to criticize? What about the fact that the majority of the plot is arbitrary and contrived? Oma's actions and motivations are contrived, the flashback lights are stupid and tell contrived, dumb stories, the characters are the way they are because Tsumugi said so? Is this the same as a contrived story? I think that most stories that are arbitrary like this, like, oh, I wrote you to be the way you are, so this is how you are, I think most stories that do that usually is just an excuse, and the plot could have been written to be anything else under the same excuse. But I don't think V3 could just change its elements as freely as they say. V3 is making very specific criticisms of very specific writing mistakes, of bad writing habits. I don't think its choices are arbitrary at all. I think at the core of what the story is trying to get across, it is very intentional and not contrived in its meta. It had to be told this way with these elements to express itself and all of these specific ideas. This is different from the kind of story that V3 is criticizing. The kind of story that they talk about where everything is expendable and replaceable, all the characters are expendable, they can all be replaced with any other character to slap into the formula. On a personal note, I will say that I think V3 has a lot of segments that are more boring or annoying to get through, but I don't think this is necessarily connected with their intentions in the meta. I think some parts just kind of drag out or feel a bit hammy and could have just been trimmed down a lot. I mainly feel this while they're talking about the fake story stuff with the meteors and the cult and shit, because it's so obvious that shit doesn't matter and that it's not interesting, especially like Chapter 5 or 4 onwards, but it still wastes a lot of time establishing it as part of this criticism. That's the one part of the meta I feel it does pretty poorly, is how boring and unfun the fake V3 plot is to watch and get uncovered, especially in Chapters 5 and 6. But yeah, the game is not loose at all. It has a lot of structuring to its meta that you might not notice at a glance, and I think it's pretty clever. I think V3 is a game that's more fun to think about than to actually play, for better or worse, probably for worse, so it isn't my favorite game in the series. I love the mythos of DR2 the most. As clever as the criticisms in V3 are, I don't find thematic messaging as interesting as like a really unique mythos, you know? But anyways, I hope I've taught you something new about V3 you didn't already know. That's all from me. See ya.